Hello there, you're watching the press preview, a first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. In the next half hour, we'll see what's making the headlines with the political editor of the Daily Mirror, John Stevens, and the journalist and broadcaster, Carolyn Quinn. Welcome both. So let's see what is on some of those front pages. Well, the Princess of Wales takes centre stage in the Mail on Sunday, with Troop in the Colour branded the day that lifted the nation's hearts. The Sun on Sunday says the princess back on parade is a super trooper. The Sunday Telegraph goes with Our Fair Lady lifts the nation's spirits. She also takes the lead for the Sunday Express, who say it's Kate to see you again. And for the Sunday Mirror, it's Kate to have you back. Meanwhile, the general election is the lead for the Observer, with a warning that the NHS will be worse off no matter who wins. In the Sunday Times, there is an interview with the Prime Minister in which he reveals the strength he draws from his Hindu faith as a new poll predicts a 262-seat majority for Labour. And finally, in the Daily Star Sunday, a psychic's prediction that football is coming home. We'll see if they're right. And the reminder that by scanning the QR code you'll see on screen during the programme, you can check out the front pages of tomorrow's papers while you watch us. And we are joined tonight by the political editor at the Daily Mirror, John Stevens, and the journalist and broadcaster, Carolyn Quinn. Great to have you here this evening. Well, unsurprisingly, pictures of the Princess of Wales dominate most of the papers, certainly the front pages. Let's just start by looking at the Mail. It's lovely to see you too, Kate. Going to the Sunday Telegraph, just showing some of those front pages. Our Fair Lady lifts our nation's spirits, and similar pictures, and the one the Sunday Telegraph taken, of course, from the balcony. It was a special occasion, wasn't it, John? I mean, the Troop in the Colour itself, but seeing her after all these months. Yeah, I mean, it's remarkable looking, seeing how well Kate is looking, considering what she's been through health-wise. I mean, at these events through the last few years, I mean, Kate always looks stunning. Her outfits always look perfect. But, I mean, she looks so well today that you'd never know that she'd been battling this illness. And that statement that Kensington Palace put out on Friday evening, with her being quite honest, saying some days she feels quite well, some days she doesn't feel that well. So I think that, yeah, it is just brilliant that she's clearly looking so well in these pictures. And it must be so hard for her when she knows there's going to be so much scrutiny about how she looks. There's always scrutiny about how she looks. To be able to go out there, you know that you're going to have all these cameras on you at all these points. It must be really hard, and it is great that she's looking so well. And just to be back with the family again, doing what her family says she really wants to do, which is being in public with her children, her husband, and of course with the King, who himself has had a cancer diagnosis. Most families going through cancer know the pain of it. To have two people within your family unit, however privileged, however rich, it shows that cancer can strike. And I think that seems to be the thing that comes through in these papers, the inspirational picture that she's provided. And also, in a way, sharing the King's special day, because, of course, it's his official birthday. How important do you think it was, Carolyn, for the image of the royal family right now, to have that picture on the balcony with the family there? Oh, I think, you know, the uplifting in the nation's spirits is something that a lot of the headlines draw on, because it's almost a feeling of back to normality. Things aren't normal, of course, for Kate. She's made that clear, that she's still got months of treatment to go. And it's interesting, in the Express, Karol Sikora, who's a world-renowned former director of a World Cancer Programme, he said what Kate has done is a tremendous boost to all cancer patients in Britain at the moment. They realise they're not alone, and people with cancer are listening to what she says about it. She's a role model for it. Interestingly, though, for the kids, for Prince Louis, it was sort of business as usual.
Classic,
yawning. When is this all going to be over? Still kids. So back to normal. And of course, the rain, I mean, which was a bit of an annoyance today, but it didn't dampen the spirits. OK, let's look at some other stories. Let's go to the Sunday Times and look at the front page of the Sunday Times, where there is an interview with Rishi Sunak, where he talks about his Hindu faith, and the headline there, Faith and Duty guide me through my election trials. John, what do you make of, I guess, what he's mentioning and the strategy? We're now halfway through the election campaign.
Yeah, we're halfway through. I think is it 21, 22, maybe 23 days now gone, about 20 left to go. About 3 weeks. And so we've got a quite personal interview from Rishi Sunak here. We're used to him talking about policy. We're used to him talking about the strains of Downing Street. But here he is talking about his Hindu faith. And one of the things it notes in the Sunday Times article is it's quite unusual for politicians to talk about their faith like this. Obviously, everyone remembers Alistair Campbell with Tony Blair saying, "We don't do God." But here is the Prime Minister talking about his faith, talking about how his kind of feeling of duty, part of that comes from his Hindu upbringing. I think it's quite interesting. I think that at a time of elections, people do want to hear about policy, but they do also want to hear about who is this person I'm picking as Prime Minister to go through the door of number 10. I think they're interested in both Keir Starmer and Rishi Sunak, both what they're doing for the country, but also their personal character.
And also the fact that he has talked about it himself, trying to bring it to the fore himself rather than it being forced from him. As you say, Tony Blair did talk about God. Well, he didn't really want to, did he? But I think it was Jeremy Paxman, wasn't it, that asked him at the time of the Iraq war if he and George Bush prayed together. And I don't think he welcomed the probing into his religious beliefs at that point. But here we have Rishi Sunak making clear that he does draw strength from his faith. And, of course, he has great trials at the moment.
He definitely needs some help at the moment.
He needs some help.
Yeah, well, speaking of that, let's go to the Sunday Telegraph. Front page there, comments from a former cabinet minister. So looking at the Sunday Telegraph, the headline is, "I share voters' frustrations, but we face Labour dictatorship." Now, this is Robert Jenrick, former cabinet minister. He, of course, resigned last year over the Rwanda bill. And, I mean, it's this new angle, isn't it, Carolyn, that some people are saying the Tories have almost given up and just trying to minimise the damage. What do you think of that strategy?
Well, when you hear somebody like Robert Jenrick, we heard Suella Braverman as well making her comments about what the party should do in a response to Nigel Farage. And there have been warnings, haven't there, about a Labour landslide, and don't vote for Farage because that will just give Keir Starmer an even greater, easier run at number 10. But I don't know if you think this, John, but there is certainly a lot of tilting to the future, isn't there? Robert Jenrick, Suella Braverman, both potential Tory leaders in the future. Once the election is passed, they may be accepting that they've lost it, but there are certain battles ahead.
Oh, definitely. And you can see people like Robert Jenrick, like Suella Braverman, as you say, already positioning themselves in case a vacancy comes up, which is looking more unlikely it will do. I think also for Robert Jenrick personally, if you look back at the Sunday Times, they've got a poll, they've got one of these MRP polls where they can map seat by seat. And they're actually suggesting that Robert Jenrick is at danger of losing his seat in Newark. And that's a seat who he won it in a by-election, and that was a by-election where it looked like UKIP might be able to beat the Tories. And so I wonder if his comments on Farage and saying if you vote for reform, you're kind of giving Keir Starmer a blank cheque. I wonder if part of that is not just about jockeying for the leadership, but it's about trying to save his own skin in that seat.
Yeah, because Penny Mordaunt, who also risks losing her seat, called Nigel Farage a Labour enabler, didn't she, during that seven-way debate earlier in the week. And, I mean, they clearly are spooked by the Farage effect, where it goes from here. And, as I say, they're just looking to the future, really, aren't they? Those of them that remain in the Commons will then be battling out for the leadership.
And what do you make of the Farage effect, especially since we've seen these polls over the past few days, one that put, in fairness, just by 1 percentage point, but 1 point, Reform 1 point ahead of the Tories. How do you think the next 3 weeks will pan out?
Well, he will be enjoying every minute of this. As soon as that one poll came out to say that his party Reform were 1 point ahead of the Conservatives. He made a point of announcing it on television. He's been saying that he will be the opposition to a Labour government. He has been a sore in the Conservative side since 2014. You know, he has been a constant menace as far as they're concerned. And he's been an influencer on policy, and he's doing it again.
I think there's a real problem for the Tories here that obviously reform could cause real damage to them, not in taking seats, but be able to take away votes in marginal seats and be able to make the difference between the Tories or Labour win them. I think that there will be a problem, though, if they do win some seats. And I don't think this MRP poll today was suggesting they might win 7 seats. Yeah. I would be sceptical about that, but it is a slight problem. It might be a bit like Japanese knotweed. Once they're in, you can't stop them.
Let's take a look at some of the policies or sort of, you know, what might happen. The Observer front page. Both parties will leave the NHS worse off than the austerity years. The NHS, obviously, a huge focus of this election. What does this article actually say, John?
Yeah, so this is some research by the Nuffield Trust, which is a think tank, and they looked through the different parties' manifestos, and they are talking about how the percentage increase in spending on the NHS that they think that they suggest, and they're suggesting that whichever party is victorious, that the amount of spending increase on the NHS isn't going to be big enough. And I think this is a bit problematic for Labour, that the party is very good at pointing out the problems in the NHS. We're all very aware that there are problems, people ringing 999, people getting ambulances, cancer waiting times. There are so many problems with the NHS, but obviously Labour have had the problem that they haven't been willing to promise big increases in taxes because they know if they did that, they would be completely hammered by the Tories.
And the independent experts, the IFS, for instance, they've been talking about a conspiracy of silence from both parties because they're saying we won't raise income tax, national insurance, VAT, corporation tax. I think Keir Starmer today was saying we won't raise capital gains tax either. So the question is, where do you find the money from to fund your changes? And also, if you are going to talk about the NHS facing severe cuts, the NHS is supposed to be one of the protected departments when we're looking to the future. So what on earth does that mean for the unprotected departments? How much will they have to bear the brunt of public spending cuts?
Carolyn, John, stay with us. Coming up, among the stories we will be discussing this on the front of the Sunday Times. Their headline, Fury after police car rams calf. We'll explain later.
It's catastrophic. And you said it's more than a year now. And actually, the situation is rapidly deteriorating. Right now, there's a huge battle ongoing in North Darfur in the city of Al Fasher. And we are seeing relentless bombing of the city, civilian infrastructures being destroyed, people having to flee but having nowhere to flee. And we are seeing also massacres in the middle of the country. Just last week, 100 of civilians were killed by the Rapid Support Force just in one day, in one village. And on top of this, we're looking at the largest hunger crisis in the world right now unfolding. It's really terrible. My colleague just left Al Fasher last week, and it was a very treacherous journey. It was a horrible journey, and he had stayed, the longest time there. And he was telling me, people were queuing in the street to get water. There was huge shortages of water, of food. Nobody could reach to the hospital. A lot of, wounded actually never made it to the hospital during the fighting. And the warring parties are completely not respecting any civilian infrastructures. The hospital was raided. And this is North Darfur, but across the entire Darfur, which is as big as Spain, people are struggling. My team's underground. I think people who cannot afford even a meal a day. They're eating soil. They're eating leaves. Women have to sell themselves, their body for food. We have like people who have to sell their, they live in shelters, in like shelters like you see on the picture, and they have to sell their roof in order to afford a meal. Like the situation is really bad, and you have people who are either going to be killed by violence or killed by hunger. The gravity of the situation compared to the attention that the international community is given is unspeakable. I have no word to express how much neglected Sudan is. I mean, the international community has had now a year of like everyday fighting, and yet it has still not come up as a group at high level to stop the, to engage with the warring parties and stop the fighting.
Welcome back. You're watching the press preview. With me in the studio are the political editor of the Daily Mirror, John Stevens, and the journalist and broadcaster, Carolyn Quinn. Okay, let's go straight to The Observer. Interesting story here and an interesting take. Let's pull it up. Front page of The Observer. Private school numbers up despite the VAT charge fears. Obviously, one of the Labour policies would be the 20% addition to the VAT to school fees. There have been a lot of articles saying that this would, harm obviously the private school sector, but also would have an impact on state schools. What do you make of this the story, but the way it's written?
Yeah, so it's quite interesting. We've been hearing from private schools over the last few months all these warnings that if you did get rid of their VAT exemption and they had to start charging that on fees, that you would see thousands and thousands of students being pulled out of schools and going into the state sector. And they'd been warning that parents were putting their children out in advance of Labour coming into power, or the chance of Labour coming into power, because they were worried about this. But these figures from the Department for Education show that at the moment, that doesn't seem to be the case. And the point that Labour have been making for quite a while is that school fees have gone up significantly for private schools in the last few years, and they've gone up about 50% since 2010. And there hasn't been any sort of drop in numbers. The numbers have gone up and up. And so far, these figures would suggest there won't be a big impact on the number of people going to private school if Labour do get into government.
And Keir Starmer faced questions, didn't he, in the Sky debate this week from an individual, a gentleman who said that I will lose out if my child has to leave the private school that we go to. And other parents have said we can't get a state school in our area. That's why we have to go for a private school. But Keir Starmer's been absolutely ruthless about this, and he's not ashamed to say he's going to be ruthless about it, because they definitely want to use that money, that £1.5 billion raised from imposing 20% VAT, on providing 6,500 more teachers. And he specifically mentions maths teachers, those teachers that are really, really needed in state schools.
OK, let's go to the Sunday Times. Very different sort of story there. On the front page, fury after a police car rams calf. Now, a strange one, this, and the images, and we're showing some of it on Sky. We're not showing the moment of impact. But basically, it's a police car, a Surrey police car. I think we can see bits of it now, that just hit a cow and quite violently, actually.
Yeah, I mean, I was scrolling on my phone earlier on Twitter and came across the footage and didn't know what it was, and then watched the whole thing and then just thought, I really wish I hadn't seen that video.
Yeah.
And I'm glad Jenny's showing part of it on TV because it is really horrible. The police car hits the cow and then just as it tries to get up again, it gets hit again. And obviously...
And this is in Feltham, by the way.
This is in Feltham, this is Surrey Police. And the police were saying that the cow had been on the loose for a long time, that they thought was a risk to the public, and they tried everything they could and nothing else seems to be working. But just seeing that video, it does seem particularly heavy-handed. I'm surprised that, you know, so far we hear that the cow is being treated, that it's just got a large cut on its leg. But when you watch the video, I am just surprised that the cow survived at all. It's just horrific.
How dangerous can a calf be? The question is, what's it doing on a suburban road?
Yes,
of course.
yes.
But really, what possessed the police to think that they could ram it with their car? Did they not think that people might be watching? I mean, there are some strategic asterisks in the story, as one man shouting at the officers, "What the was that?" But I think people would just be astonished what was going through their minds.
And presumably the cow would be totally panicked at this point, having been followed by the police.
Was there not a vet around that could shoot it with a dart or...
So apparently the cow is now being treated by a vet and
Right.
hopefully, you know, seems to be, you know, on the mend, apart from the cut on its leg. Anyway, so that's perhaps one of the strangest stories of the day. And now let's go to a story, well, really for tomorrow, but I suppose we can start looking forward to it today. Express page 3. And there it is, some very happy England fans. Bring it home, lads. And this is, of course, the first England game of Euro 2024 tomorrow.
Yeah, so we always start with hope. We always start with thinking that we can win, and then it maybe...
You got to the final last time. That's not bad.
Exactly. Maybe let's see how it goes. But obviously, England playing Serbia tomorrow. I think we were talking before about Serbia, the 33rd best team in the world. She would hope that maybe it's a good start, but let's see.
But you just never know, do you? Because in the friendly with Iceland, which is way down in the pecking order, England, of course, lost to Iceland just very recently, playing their best team. So, I don't know, nerves can set in. You've got Harry Kane, who's desperate to win some sort of trophy, because even though he's been a brilliant goal scorer throughout his career, he's never actually brought home a medal. So he will be desperate to show that he can do it. And, of course, there are young players like Jude Bellingham, lots of focus on them. It's nerve-wracking, especially if you think you might, at the end of it, if you get through to a final, have to face penalties, because we saw what happened last time with Italy.
But got to the final, so you know,
got to the
we did
final,
well.
yeah.
I'm being told that the Daily Star have got an interesting front page on this. OK, so Nostradamus' cousin says the 3 Lions to win Euros. Don't really know where to go with that. John?
You always get some sort of mystic
psychic
animal, usually.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not just Nostradamus' actual cousin. Because we used to have, was it Paul the Octopus, who would predict whether we were going to win or not?
And haven't we got Ludwig the sausage dog is the latest addition to that. So,
Do you think he'll have any impact on the spirits of the nation with the election and, you know, all sorts of other problems, and the weather, I have to say, being awful as well?
I think the election might have to take a slight backseat on some days.
I think so.
You know, whenever there's a England game or a Scotland game, I think that any politician trying to still knock doors would maybe think better of that.
And I think we'll see some pictures, won't we, of all the leaders watching the England game.
Very exciting.
Yes.
Carol and John, we're going to have to leave it there
not.
for now, but thank you. Coming up next on Sky News at 11, the Princess of Wales attends Trooping the Colour as she returns to royal duties following her cancer diagnosis.